Now on BBC Two, how the party leaders are preparing to speak to their public in the run-up to the general election. How to win the TV debate with Michael Cockerell.
Because of the following special broadcast, the programs originally scheduled will not be seen tonight. Next week at this time, The Andy Griffith Show and Hennessy will be seen on most of these stations.
Good evening. The television and radio stations of the United States and their affiliated stations are proud to provide facilities for a discussion of issues in the current political campaign by the two major candidates for the presidency. The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy.
It's exactly 50 years since the famous Kennedy-Nixon debate in Chicago. Tonight I'll be telling the inside story of why, despite numerous false starts, it's taken half a century for face-to-face debates to come to a British election.
We should be. Are we as strong as we must be if we're going to maintain our independence?
And we'll look at the lessons from America for our British political leaders on how to win the television debate.
Whatever you do, answer the question.
You really do need to have your sound bites, your spin. 3 lines that you're going to insert somewhere.
If you grab the lead role for yourself, the other guy is the second banana. And that's just the way it's going to be.
Was I glad when the damn thing was over? Yeah. And maybe that's why I was looking at it. Yeah. Only 10 more minutes of this crap. I mean.
The stage is set. The candidates are ready. They've been preparing behind closed doors for the great debate, the first time ever in a British general election. Every other country that calls itself a democracy has them. But until now, the British public has been denied a TV clash of our political titans.
The opportunity to confront Margaret Thatcher in a television debate would have filled me with satisfaction, simply because there were things to be said, arguments to be made to her between the eyes.
It's just amazing it hasn't happened before now. I'm just so frustrated that I'm not the leader of the Lib Dems, and I bet you Paddy Ashdown and David Steele feel just the same way. We'd have given our left legs to be in one of these debates.
It's like a great spaghetti western, isn't it? The climax, the good, the bad and the ugly, where these 3 guys are sort of eyeing each other in the ring and no one knowing who's going to draw first and who's going to take the first shot at the other man.
Chicago, the home city of Al Capone, was the setting for the very first election shootout on TV.
Will you take camera 2, please, Roger?
Don Hewitt was a top political producer for CBS News.
What the hell am I seeing? Is that the light?
It's 1960 in Chicago, and I'm producing and directing something called the first of the presidential debates.
Will you let me see the tight shot on camera 1, please? Let me see one wider than that.
In the studio, Richard Nixon faced test shots for the TV cameras, while his opponent, John F. Kennedy, had a voice-level test.
You hear me now, speaking? Is that about the right tone of voice?
Kennedy offered a sharp contrast to Nixon. He was the product of a Boston Catholic millionaire dynasty.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy has been a United States Senator for 7 years. He's blessed with many advantages. He has wealth, brains, looks, and a very beautiful wife.
The Kennedys were the prototype power couple. But Kennedy was the outsider in the race for the White House, up against a much better-known opponent. Richard Nixon had been the Republican vice president for 8 years. He'd grown up in poverty and liked to claim that he had no time for image makers.
I am really the most difficult man in the world when it comes to a so-called public relations firm. Nobody's going to package me. Nobody's going to make me put on an act for television. I'm not going to engage in any gimmicks or any stunts, wear any silly hats, do something for the purpose of getting a publicity picture or the rest. I am not an actor. I'm not a good actor. I'm just going to be myself.
But Nixon had a reputation as a formidable debater, which was enhanced when he confronted Nikita Khrushchev, the pugnacious Soviet communist leader. Khrushchev was touring an exhibition in Moscow of showpiece communist kitchens when he came face to face with Vice President Nixon.
Вырвались из этого, понимаете, положения, когда нас идея не пугает.
We are not afraid of ideas. Well, then let's have more exchange of them. We all agree on that, right? And it will teach you some things, too. Because after all, you don't know everything.
After Khrushchev, Nixon thought Kennedy would be easy meat in the TV debates. But Kennedy and his closest advisor, Ted Sorensen, felt that the debates would project him nationally, with equal status to the vice president.
Kennedy knew that it was to his advantage to debate Nixon. He was the underdog. He was regarded as the junior, the least experienced. Nixon, who had debated Khrushchev in Moscow, was famous as being a skilled, powerful, slashing debater, and many people thought he would wipe the floor with Kennedy.
But Nixon had a shifty public image. Kennedy's campaign ads asked, "Would you buy a used car from this man?" Ironically, Nixon damaged his knee getting out of a car the month before the debate. His knee became badly infected, and he was confined to hospital with a high fever.
What had happened is I'd injured my knee down in North Carolina. I had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. I started out on a campaign before I was completely healed, and as a result, I was simply below par.
Kennedy, in contrast, arrived in Chicago the day before the debate, looking a picture of health.
We went to Chicago, had a good night's sleep, got up early in the morning, sat on the roof of his hotel in the sun to get a natural suntan, which is a lot better looking than makeup. And my deputy and I sat across from him, equipped with lots of file cards. And on each file card were all the questions, mostly tough ones, that we could think might arise.
His advisors left Kennedy to study his cards. But as the time for the TV debate drew near, the candidate was nowhere to be seen.
So finally, I was deputized to go get the candidate, and I opened the door of his hotel bedroom, and there he was, still sound asleep on the bed, covered in cards. He'd been rating and reviewing them when he fell asleep.
As the final touches were being applied to the debate studio, the car carrying Nixon, who was still suffering the after effects of his knee infection, arrived at the CBS building.
Nixon got out of the car and the guard said good evening, and with that Nixon hit his infected knee on the point of the rear door, just like a sword. And it went into his knee, and he uttered some sort of an audible cry of pain, and he grabbed his knee with both of his hands.
Once inside the studio, Nixon was briefed by the debate producer, Don Hewitt.
David, will you hit the 1 minute button, please? On your camera. The 30 seconds and the cut, please.
The cut means that's it.
Get out, Grace.
5 seconds. Right?
No.
What I mean is you want to quit quickly, or how?
Yes.
How
well,
much?
we figure when you see 30 seconds,
Then
you'll
try
start
to bring
pacing
it.
yourself.
All right.
And then the cut is, that's it. And then Howard will give you a few seconds over the cut, and then bang,
I
bang.
understand. Sure. Well, right. we'll cut it.
Then Kennedy ambled into the studio.
All right, one more. Okay. Now.
Kennedy arrived looking tan, handsome, well-tailored, been campaigning in an open convertible in California. You know, looked like the cover of some movie star magazine.
What a simple one, no problem.
Nixon had been suffering from an infection. He looked green and sallow.
I think I better shave.
And they shook hands, and I said, "You want makeup?" Kennedy said, "No, I don't think I want makeup." Nixon heard Kennedy say that, and he figured if I have makeup, that's what they'll write about tomorrow morning. I was made up, he wasn't. So he said no, but he needed it. He went back into an office with some members of his staff, and it was made up with something called lazy shave, which you use to cover a beard if you're going out in the evening and you don't want to shave. Came back, looked like death warmed over.
While Nixon waited for the debate to begin, Kennedy stayed in his dressing room with his TV advisor, who touched up Kennedy's tan with Max Factor makeup.
Kennedy said, I'm not going out into the studio until Nixon's there. Well, we went into the studio maybe 15 seconds before airtime, and Nixon had been standing there for 4 or 5 minutes. And there's a kind of letdown that occurs when you go into a studio and then have to wait for the show to begin or for the airtime to commence. And Kennedy came bustling right in, a barrel of energy, got up to the podium, he was on the air. And he just...
Mr. Smith, Mr. Nixon.
Turned on.
In the election of 1860, Abraham Lincoln said the question was whether this nation could exist, half slave or half free. In the election of 1960, and with the world around us, the question is whether the world will exist, half slave or half free, whether it will move in the direction...
To counter Nixon's charge that Kennedy was a woolly liberal, soft on communism, Kennedy and his advisors had decided he would present a hard-line stance.
Mr. Khrushchev maintains the communist offensive throughout the world. The kind of country we have here, the kind of strength we build in the United States, will be the defense of freedom.
Kennedy's opponent also wanted to neutralize his perceived negatives and counter his mean-spirited, tricky-dicky image.
Mr. Smith, Senator Kennedy, we are in a deadly competition. A competition not only with the men in the Kremlin, but the men in Peking. We're ahead in this competition, as Senator Kennedy, I think, has implied. But when you're in a race, the only way to stay ahead is to move ahead. And I subscribe completely to the spirit that Senator Kennedy has expressed tonight.
Nixon basically came across as someone who was agreeing with Senator Kennedy again and again. You go back and you read the transcript. I agree with Senator Kennedy. I agree with Senator Kennedy. And he looked bad.
Let's put it in terms that all of us can understand. We often hear gross negative...
Compared to Nixon, Kennedy appeared relaxed and confident in a dark suit, specially chosen to make him appear authoritative on television.
And in that respect,
by contrast, Nixon's light suit made the vice president almost blend into the background.
with that of the previous administration,
Watching the live debate in the TV control room were the candidates' two media advisors. Kennedy's advisor saw a close-up shot of Nixon on the monitor.
He was clean-shaven, but he had that shadow, that 4 o'clock shadow, that might have been about 5 o'clock at that point. And as he perspired, I started saying, we need reaction shots. You owe me 3. We've had 3 of my men, now we need 3 of your men.
Don Hewitt was between us. And all of a sudden, Don Hewitt took a reaction shot. And I think they caught Nixon off guard. He was wiping some perspiration off of his brow or off of his upper lip or something like that. And Bill Wilson said, let's take some more. I want more reaction shots.
It was just exactly the right moment, because those reaction shots made Richard Nixon look like he was sweating because of the debate, and it put him in a position of not being in charge. John F. Kennedy was in charge.
I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. I hope he would grant me the same. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
I remember my mother, who's a pretty good judge, called immediately afterwards and wondered if I were ill, as far as the television audience was concerned. However, there isn't any question that Senator Kennedy did come out ahead. He looked better. He sounded more vigorous than I did. And frankly, he therefore deserved to win.
After the debate, Kennedy's press secretary, Pierre Salinger, briefed his candidate on the public reaction in the opinion polls.
While the overwhelming number of people who saw the debates, and I underline the word saw, believed that John Kennedy had won them, an equally overwhelming number of people who only heard the debates, didn't have a television set, thought that Richard Nixon had won them.
Senator, could you spare a moment for the BBC?
Sure.
Do you think the national televised debates between you and Mr. Nixon have made a great deal of difference to the campaign?
I think they've been important.
In what way?
Well, they
A good deal of the press in this country supports Mr. Nixon. This way, we're able to get and discuss these issues face-to-face with Mr. Nixon and get to the people without going through the press.
It seemed that the ruling spirit of American democracy was no longer Thomas Jefferson, it was Max Factor. And the new president's progress was closely monitored across the Atlantic by the Labour Party leader. Harold Wilson, who used to holiday on the Scilly Isles, presented himself as the British JFK. Like Kennedy, Wilson saw TV as a way of reaching voters direct and bypassing the right-wing press.
What I think we're going to need is something like what President Kennedy had when he came in after years of stagnation in the United States. He had a program of 100 days of dynamic action.
The Tory Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume, an old Etonian, was Harold Wilson's opponent in the 1964 general election.
My cameraman colleagues have asked me if you give one wave on the steps, sir. If I duck out of the way.
Hume had renounced his hereditary earldom to become Prime Minister. Harold Wilson had been to the White House to see Kennedy, hoping to catch some of the president's stardust. Claiming to represent the future like JFK, Wilson challenged Hume to the first ever TV election debate in Britain.
Have you decided, Prime Minister, whether to take part in some kind of television debate or confrontation with Mr. Wilson during the election campaign?
My first reaction to this is that the British election is something in which something over 600 constituencies have to decide the issues, and the issues are issues of policy. And therefore, I'm not particularly attracted by, so to speak, confrontations of personality. If we aren't careful, you know, you'll get a sort of, what's it called, top of the pops contest. I dare say I should win it, I'm not sure.
Yes, it's number one. It's top of the pops.
I'm not really very much attracted by this. You'll first then get the best actor as leader of the country, and the actor will be prompted by a scriptwriter. I'd rather have our old ways, really, and put our policies firmly in front of our people.
But if you decline Mr. Wilson's challenge, and after all, debate is between personalities is in the great British political tradition, might it not look as if you were running away?
Oh, no, I don't think so. After all, I debate with Mr. Wilson in Parliament. But I shall decide if I want to confront Mr. Wilson, not Mr. Wilson if he wants to confront me.
Wilson won the election after Hume had refused a face-to-face debate. But he only had a tiny majority. And within 18 months, he was to call a fresh election, and he was up against a new Tory leader. Ted Heath, a grammar school boy like himself, was thought to be good on television and challenged Wilson to an election debate. But ironically, Wilson, now the incumbent Prime Minister, turned it down.
Well, is Mr. Wilson proud of it? Apparently not. You think he is? Well, then ask him why he doesn't come onto television and face me there and argue it out.
Wilson's political secretary, Marcia Falkender, later explained candidly to me why the Prime Minister had declined to debate with Ted Heath.
To appear with him on television would have been giving him a lot of exposure, and exposure in a setting that Heath wanted and needed, namely exposure as a potential Prime Minister. And Harold's office would in fact have rubbed off on Heath appearing on equal terms with him. He decided that was not going to happen.
Ironically, in America, there were no more presidential debates for 16 years after Kennedy-Nixon, as two incumbent presidents had taken Wilson's line and refused to debate with their challengers. But Vice President Gerald Ford took over the White House after the disgraced President Nixon was forced from office. And Ford decided he would debate in the '76 election with his Democratic challenger, Jimmy Carter. Carter was a peanut farmer and governor of Georgia. He admitted he was overawed by the prospect of debating with the Republican president.
It was a very disturbing concept for me to be on the stage with the President of the United States. I've never even met a Democratic president in my life, so there was an aura about the presidency that was quite overwhelming.
Well behind in the polls, President Ford felt he had nothing to lose by agreeing to a debate, which he prepared for with his advisors.
I was on the debate preparation team, and frankly, we had debates within the White House about how to handle the debate. There were some who argued we ought to use the debate to be above it all. You're the president, you're in the White House. Who is this peanut farmer from Georgia running against us? Let's just sort of float above him and use the prestige of the office to float through the debate. I thought that was the wrong strategy. I felt that Jimmy Carter happens to be a very smart man, and you have to engage him on the substance, otherwise he's going to pick you apart.
In the smoky private White House cinema, Ford rehearsed for the debate in footage that's never been shown before. The big question was, who would play the role of Jimmy Carter? Ford's advisors came up with a cunning plan. They would get Carter. They brought in a television which would show clips of the Georgia governor for Ford to respond to.
I'm going to go ahead. Mr. Carter, can you give us some idea of what you intend to achieve if you get to the White House?
There are three issues that have been most important, I think, in the election and one today. One is whether or not our government itself can be competent, whether it can deliver services that our people expect and need. Secondly, whether the government itself, particularly the president, will be constantly sensitive to the needs of people who are most deprived. And the third one is to restore the confidence of our people, the faith of our people in the government itself.
Mr. President, would you care to comment?
Every president has the responsibility to improve the competence of the federal government.
The first of 3 debates was to take place in Philadelphia, with an invited audience which had to listen in silence and not clap, cheer or boo. Questions would be put by a panel of journalists. Carter's people wouldn't agree to Ford using his own lectern with the presidential seal. Instead, there would be equal-sized lecterns which would disguise the president's 3-inch height advantage. And Ford's lectern had a special recessed holder for a water glass to prevent the accident-prone president knocking it over. But for all the elaborate preparations, the debate was to be remembered less for what was said than for what wasn't.
One of the very serious things that's happened in our government in recent years, and has continued up until now, is a breakdown in the trust among our people and the...
There was a breakdown in the sound from the studio.
I watched the tape afterwards, and it was embarrassing to me that both President Ford and I stood there almost like robots. We didn't move around, we didn't walk over and shake hands with each other, we just stood there.
At the moment, all we can do is watch this interesting development with the President of the United States, who also happens to be a candidate for the presidency of the United States.
It took 27 minutes to restore the sound.
I suspect both of us were hesitant to make any gesture that might look like we weren't physically or mentally able to handle a problem like this.
The second debate took place in San Francisco, but this time President Ford would have wished the sound to fail, as he misremembered what he'd been coached to say, that America would never accept Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. Instead, it came out rather differently.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
Did you realize at the time what a gaffe it was for President Ford to say there was no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe?
It didn't hit me as fully as it should have in the first moment, but as soon as I saw it in isolation afterwards, I realized we got a real problem here.
President Ford met at the White House this morning with a group representing Polish, Armenian, Hungarian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Estonian, Czechoslovakian, and Ukrainian voters.
For the first time since the debate, the president flatly admitted he had made a mistake when he said Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe were not dominated by the Soviet Union.
Repeated on television every single day until the election was this gaffe of Gerald Ford's. And again, I think that gaffe could have cost him the presidency of the United States. That's how important these debates are. These debates can win or lose you an election, and they have done so.
On his first overseas presidential trip, Jimmy Carter came to Britain, where he was greeted by the Labour Prime Minister Jim Callaghan. The two JCs were good friends, and would discuss informally whether American-style election debates should be exported across the Atlantic.
After your tiring journey, we don't intend to keep you for more than a second, but I'd like to welcome you here as the representative of a country which we love. Welcome. You're a good guy.
Callaghan's election opponent was Margaret Thatcher. She was a TV novice compared to Callaghan, who'd held all the top government posts and was an old hand in the studios. But Callaghan was behind in the polls and became the first incumbent Prime Minister to agree to a TV debate. Mrs. Thatcher, urged on by the Sun, was at first inclined to accept the challenge. But her influential spin doctor and image maker Gordon Rees had other ideas.
Gordon Rees realised that there was nothing to be gained by a relatively inexperienced woman going on television against a hugely experienced and avuncular opponent like Jim Callaghan, and particularly when she was pretty well ahead in the polls and expected to win. What was the point? She had a television presence every time she walked out into a high street.
We're going to wave up there.
There was a phenomenon called Margaret Thatcher in the high street, and the television cameras captured that. Why risk it all by going into a very strange, awkward format in which she would not have been comfortable anyway?
I've been face to face with Mr. Callaghan for 3 years in Parliament. I've never got a straight answer to a straight question yet, and you can't teach old dogs new tricks.
Mrs. Thatcher's letter turning down the debate proposals said that presidential-style debates were alien to Britain and risked turning the campaign into show business. She believed policies, not personalities, decide elections, and concluded, "We're not electing a president, we're choosing a government." But one Hollywood actor saw things rather differently.
I was afraid you wouldn't come.
Ronald Reagan met his future wife, the actress Nancy Davis, while making Hellcats of the Navy.
What are you going to do after the war, Case?
Such films had allowed Reagan to hone his skills at delivering a line on camera.
I've told you 100 times.
I want to hear it once more.
I'm going into the surplus business.
Reagan went not into the surplus business, but politics. Elected governor of California, he became the first showbiz star to run for the White House. And in 1980, when Reagan was the Republican candidate for president, I talked to him on the campaign trail.
Governor, from the BBC in London, do you have any doubts about your ability to play the role of America's leading man?
Do I have any doubts about my ability to play the role of leading man in America? I've never thought of it that way. I left that profession. I have confidence, based on my experience as governor, that I can offer a better solution to the problems than either of the men who are running against me.
In the 1980 election, Reagan was up against Jimmy Carter, who was seen as a weak president. Carter agreed to just a single face-to-face debate with Reagan. Reagan prepared for the debate with his advisors, who suggested how he should answer the charge that he was both dangerous and dumb.
Reagan picked up the answers. He was listening to you like he was listening to a movie director telling him, here's what you ought to do. I'd change it. I'd focus on this, sir. And that's a good answer, sir. And I think you ought to get this point in. Yeah, okay. I think you're right, you know. And he was very much all that.
An emphasis on
the debate with Carter was to become memorable for a Reagan one-liner, known in the States as a zinger.
Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare.
Governor, there you go again. When I opposed Medicare, there was another piece of legislation meeting the same problem before the Congress. I happened to favor the other piece of legislation and thought that it would be better.
There you go again. That dismissive line toward Carter as though, you know, this is an irritant.
Well, I'm sure that was a well-rehearsed line that President Reagan had prepared carefully, the style of delivery when he would bring it in.
They played that again and again and again in the final week of the campaign, Reagan backhanding the President of the United States.
It was kind of a denigrating thing to me. I have to, and I think that he benefited from saying that, politically speaking.
Reagan was elected the oldest president in American history at the age of almost 70. And 4 years later, there were big questions about his age when he stood for re-election. He was up against Walter Mondale, who'd been Jimmy Carter's vice president. Mondale was nearly 20 years younger than Reagan, who had agreed to 2 debates.
I want to thank President Reagan for agreeing to debate. He didn't have to, and he did, and we all appreciate it.
Reagan had been too stuffed with facts in preparation for the debate. People were worried about him, and as soon as the lights came on and you saw these two in contrast with each other, it was clear Mondale is the younger, more vital man. And then as they had the debate, Reagan stumbled around a little bit.
We're spending a third more on all of the programs of human service. With regard to the progressivity, as I've said.
Within 24 hours, the press was asking the question, has Reagan become senile? Is he losing his grip? Now, when you're an older man and you're running for president, that can be a very dangerous question.
Old age is the issue that could kill us, said one of Reagan's advisors after the first debate. They desperately tried to diffuse what they called the senility factor. At the second debate venue, nothing was left to chance. Reagan hired new TV advisors. His dais was brushed spotless, and his advisors had a special hidden amplifier installed to compensate for the president's slight deafness. And his advisors told me at the time they were insisting on much softer lighting than in the first debate.
You had some pretty severe lighting, and that'll make anybody tend to look haggard, tired, dark places on their face, and that sort of thing.
Standing there for 90 minutes, and as Mike pointed out, in light that was very severe, even if he looked well at the beginning, by the end anyone would not look too good. And as you know, the president does not wear makeup, so there's everything is open, there's nothing to hide.
You mean unlike Mr. Mondale?
Unlike Mr. Mondale.
The problem for Reagan then was the growing perception, and the Democrats reinforced it, that he's about ready to start drooling. This guy has lost it. He's 74 years old, and he may have been a nice fella, and we might have good times, but you can't put this guy back in the White House because he has really lost it. And so that was the key question at the next debate. So Reagan thought up the answer himself.
Mr. President, you already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
He got the audience with that, yeah. That I could tell that one hurt. If TV can tell the truth, as you say it can, you'll see that I was smiling. But I think if you come in close, you'll see some tears come and tell us because I knew he'd gotten me there. That was really the end of my campaign that night, I think. I walked off, and I was almost certain the campaign was over, and it was.
We in Britain think you are a wonderful president. We share so many of the same goals, which you summed up so well, and alas, I cannot imitate this wonderful American English accent. You ain't seen nothing yet.
But Margaret Thatcher had no intention of following her hero's example and holding election debates. In 1987, the Labour leader Neil Kinnock issued a challenge in Parliament, which had itself not yet admitted the TV cameras.
The Prime Minister says she is proud of a record, that she's fighting on a record. Why won't she debate it face to face with me on television?
No, Mr. Speaker, I feel such a debate would generate more hot air than light. That would not much.
The opportunity to confront Margaret Thatcher in a television debate would have intrigued and attracted the electorate and offered a degree of catharsis for me too, it has to be admitted. Well, I enjoy a fight, and that would have been a battleground, and I would have relished that.
Do you think you'd have won?
In some ways, I didn't have to win. If such a contest had taken place, all I had to do was come away with a draw, preferably a score draw. And the fact that it was a draw would have told against the Prime Minister with the advantages of office and for the Leader of the Opposition.
5 years later, the Conservative Prime Minister John Major was challenged to a three-way election debate with Neil Kinnock and the Liberal Democrat leader, Paddy Ashdown.
Why doesn't he join with me and the leader of the Liberals and say to the broadcasting organisations, we've nothing to fear from the British people, let's have the debate, let's fix a date, let's get on with it.
Every party politician that expects to lose tries that trick of debate. And every politician who expects to win says no.
Order! Well, order! This is the public debate.
That same year, 1992, was election year in America, and President George Bush Sr. was running for re-election. He was up against the Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, who was well ahead of him in the polls at a time of deep recession. And there was a third candidate, the Texas billionaire businessman Ross Perot. For one of the debates, Bush had agreed to Clinton's suggested change from the usual format. In an historic break with tradition, members of the audience, rather than journalists, were to put questions directly to the candidates.
Boy, I really wanted that because I'd done a lot of town meetings, because I think presidents should be accountable to citizens. And I think it's very interesting the questions they ask and the way they ask them. It's the flesh and blood of America, so I love those things.
How has the national debt personally affected each of your lives? And if it hasn't, how can you honestly find a cure for the economic problems of the common people if you have no experience in what's ailing them?
Well, I think the national debt affects everybody. Obviously, it has a lot to do with interest rates. It has.
She's saying you personally. On a personal basis, how has it affected you?
Has it affected you personally?
Are you suggesting that if somebody has means, that the national debt doesn't affect them?
Oh, what I'm saying.
I'm not sure I get it. Help me with the question, and I'll try to answer it.
They had asked Bush 3 times, what does the deficit and the debt mean to you? And he didn't understand the question. He couldn't answer it. They then turned to Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton, in the 1992 town hall debate, worked that group of people like a televangelist. He walked up to people, got right in their faces. You know, his empathy was palpable.
Tell me how it's affected you again. You know people who've lost their jobs and lost their homes? Well, I've been governor of a small state for 12 years. I'll tell you how it's affected me. In my state, when people lose their jobs, there's a good chance I'll know them by their names. When a factory closes, I know the people who ran it. When the businesses go bankrupt, I know them. And I've been out here for 13 months, meeting in meetings just like this, ever since October, with people like you all over America, people that have...
And the camera is lined up behind him, showing her nodding. And that action of moving towards the voters and having a voter nod in agreement is what changed the dynamic of that debate.
Another factor that changed the debate's dynamic was that the camera caught Bush consulting his watch more than once.
Big cities, it's political patronage.
Well, I remember I saw it at the time. I saw him look at his watch. And I thought, I felt when I saw it that he was, you know, uncomfortable in that setting and wanted it to be over with.
You look at your watch and they say he shouldn't have any business running for president. He's bored and he's out of this thing and he's not with it and we need change. I mean, they took a little incident like that to show that I was, you know, out of it. I mean, they made a huge thing out of that.
That sent a signal to the audience that this guy would rather be home doing something else. And the next day, that clip got played ad infinitum.
Was I glad when the damn thing was over? Yeah. And maybe that's why I was looking at it. Only 10 more minutes of this crap. I mean. Make that the heading as far as I'm concerned. And maybe I'd have said that then, I'd have done better. But you're on guard. You don't want to make a mistake. You want to say anything that's going to offend.
Tony Blair, the new Labour opposition leader, modelled his media style on the people-friendly approach of President Bill Clinton.
I see, incidentally, that Mr. Major is now planning to challenge me to a TV debate during the general election. Oh, yes. Fine. His record against our policies. Any place, any time.
To try to fix up the debates, secret negotiations took place in safe houses across Westminster between the Tories, who were well behind in the polls, Labour and the Lib Dems. But the talks broke down amid mutual public recriminations, with Labour's campaign director Peter Mandelson blaming the Tories.
They haven't been negotiating seriously or flexibly. They haven't been meeting the ideas of either the Liberal Democrats or ourselves. And we had reluctantly to conclude that they were never seriously going to reach a conclusion at all about having a debate.
John Major saw it very differently. He said, Tony Blair challenged me to a debate. To his dismay, I accepted. And to everyone's amusement, he then chickened out.
Turkeys may not vote for Christmas, but chickens apparently run away from broadcasts. I have accepted the proposals. It is up to the Labour Party to see whether they will, or whether we'll have the sort of weasel words we've had from them over the last few weeks to find an excuse for not doing so.
From then on, everywhere Blair went in the campaign, he was followed by a costumed chicken, organised by the Conservative Party.
The chicken was not John Major's idea. It certainly wasn't my idea. It was somebody, in fact, I think it was the party chairman who decided that, taking up on John Major's words, that we should make these words come to life as a dressed-up, yellow-feathered, psychotic chicken.
You've been accused by the Conservatives of chickening out of a television debate head-to-head with John Major. Would you publicly now say that you are still prepared to take part in a debate and what the terms would be?
Well, David, I publicly said it just a few days ago, and I'm perfectly happy publicly to repeat it. We have made it clear throughout that we wanted this debate, but we're not playing games with the Tories. And what happened in those negotiations were that the moment it looked as if the negotiations were about to succeed, they pulled out. So let us have a proper debate about the issues in the election.
Labour didn't really want this debate to take place. Tony Blair was streets ahead in the opinion polls. And when you're out in front, why take the risk? Why put yourself through the possibility of something going horribly wrong like that?
Hey, welcome. How are you? Good to see you, sir. Glad you're here.
The new Tory leader, William Hague, met the new Republican presidential candidate, the governor of Texas, George W. Bush, the son of the ex-president.
In your meeting with Mr. Hague, did you get the impression that one day he'll be as great a British Prime Minister as Margaret Thatcher?
I did. In fact, I did.
And are you looking forward?
Maybe as great as Winston Churchill, for that matter. Got the same hairline. No, it's
Margaret Thatcher or Winston Churchill?
Winston Churchill.
In the 2000 election, the Democrat candidate was Al Gore, who'd been Bill Clinton's vice president for 8 years. The highly experienced Gore was seen as a heavyweight compared to Bush. W was running as the anti-Washington candidate as he prepared for his face-to-face debates with Gore.
You really go into the debate thinking about how to make sure that you speak as clearly as possible. And it's really a process of quick reaction and clear thinking, and then trying to make sure that you're able to lay it out so the average guy can understand what you're saying.
A lot of people are sick and tired of the bitterness in Washington, D.C., and therefore they don't want any part of politics. They look at Washington and see people pointing fingers. It needs somebody in office who'll tell the truth.
If you want somebody who will fight for you and who will fight to have middle-class tax cuts, then I am your man. I want to be.
The debates were chaired by Jim Lehrer, a seasoned news anchorman who was surprised by the debating style Al Gore adopted.
Al Gore's people clearly had made a decision. They had to come over aggressively, and then he needed to really go after George. So he bought a new suit that had a longer coat, and he was wearing boots that had a higher heel, so he would tower over George W. Bush. And then he did this move, and it was clearly practiced.
It's not only what's your philosophy and what's your position on issues, but can you get things done? And I believe I can.
I thought that he was going to attack him. I mean, that's what it seemed like. It was a physical, I mean, he was walking right toward him. And I had thought of every eventuality, you know, about somebody keeps violating the rules or something awful happens. But that's one I had never thought of. And so what was I going to do, stand up and pull them apart?
I think, as I recall, I gave him kind of an odd expression, kind of a look, you know. But can you get things done? Well, the other option was, you know, go through a huge chest bump, which in itself would have maybe decided the debate. And he was bigger than I am, in which case
What did he think he was doing?
I don't know. I think he thought he was going to have a show of strength. There would be that he was the stronger person than George W. Bush. But it didn't work.
Be wasted. For those of you for me, thanks for your help. For those of you for my opponent, please only vote once. Yeah, I enjoyed that debate because it gave me a chance.
Now, Americans, of course, take them for granted, as do voters in many other countries. The televised debate between party leaders could soon come to British screens. The BBC and ITV have asked Tony Blair, William Hague and Charles Kennedy to take part in 2 live television debates during the next general election campaign.
I was the new kid on the block. It would be a great opportunity for me, for us, as it is this time around, as it would always have been for any Liberal leader, your moment in the spotlight on a par with the other two. So who's going to sniff at that?
Everybody is now signed up to it, except for Tony Blair. BBC, ITV, Liberal Party, Conservative Party. We should have debates.
I've decided what I decided last time round, and what I always say when this is raised is, fine in principle, but the details have to be worked out, and I'm not spending, as we did in the last election campaign, 10 days arguing about it.
The truth of the matter is that we were never up for it. We didn't want there to be a debate. We were way out ahead in the opinion polls. We had very good reason to be confident of re-election. So it wasn't a question of whether or not we would agree to a debate. It was when and by what means we would find a way of getting out of it.
4 years later, Blair did agree to appear on the same election programme as the 2 other leaders, but only if he was interviewed separately.
Mr. Blair, we've had Mr. Kennedy in that chair, we've had Mr. Howard in that chair. Why wouldn't you debate directly, face-to-face, with them in the...
I debate every week in the House of Commons with Michael Howard. I'm here to answer questions tonight, and...
2 years after winning a 3rd general election without a debate, Blair stood down. Gordon Brown took the crown without an election, in stark contrast to what was happening across the Atlantic.
Here he is.
Here he is. I'm here. The youthful Barack Obama was locked in a bitter contest for the presidency with the veteran Republican John McCain. A revealing documentary showed Obama's rehearsals for the TV debates with a white-haired lawyer playing McCain.
Let's talk about what my plan does. What's our 4 things again? Jobs. Man, jobs. Hopefully that won't happen during the debate. Huh? I don't remember my plan, but it's a really good plan.
I'm Jim Lara of the NewsHour, and I welcome you to the first of the 2008 presidential debates. The audience here in the hall has promised to remain silent. No cheers, no applause, no noise of any kind, except right now, as we welcome Senators Obama and McCain.
Although the audience would play no part, Jim Lara was determined to break with the traditional stilted format and encourage the candidates to engage in a genuine debate with each other.
For the first time, the rules not only permit but encourage the candidates to address each other and ask each other questions.
10 days ago, John said that The fundamentals of the economy are sound. I do not think that they are.
Say it directly to him.
Well, John, 10 days ago, you said that the fundamentals of the economy are sound. And
you afraid I couldn't hear him?
I'm just determined to get you all to talk to each other. I'm going to try.
Obama had no problem doing it.
Excuse me.
And I did everything I could to get McCain to direct questions and respond directly to Obama.
So, Senator McCain, do you agree with what Senator Obama just said? And if you don't, tell him what you disagree with.
No, look, we've got to fix the system. We got fundamental problems in the system.
McCain wouldn't do it. He just didn't want to.
John McCain was roundly criticized for not making eye contact with Barack Obama. And it sent a signal to a lot of viewers, myself included, that this man disdained his opponent, and that wasn't good.
the way children around the world look at the United States.
McCain's team had advised him never to look at Obama, fearing that if he did, the older man's private disdain for the young challenger would be made public.
I guarantee you, as President of the United States, I know how to heal the wounds of war, I know how to deal with our adversaries, and I know how to deal with our friends.
Before the final debate, Obama's team worked out how he should deal with the charge from the McCain camp that Obama was an extremist and associated with a former terrorist called Bill Ayers.
The question is, Senator, what does your friendship with Bill Ayers tell us about your judgment?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that Senator McCain's made this the centerpiece of his campaign at a time when we're going through the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression.
You may just want to say, so, it's important for the American people to understand who it is that's going to be advising me in the White House, a small thing.
The final debate was a seated face-to-face discussion, and the question of Obama's links with Bill Ayers, the ex-terrorist, did come up.
Again, you launched your political campaign in Mr. Ayers' living room.
That's absolutely not true.
And the facts are facts.
Let's get the record straight. Mr. Ayers is not involved in my campaign. He has never been involved in this campaign, and he will not advise me in the White House. So that's Mr. Ayers.
Barack Obama proved through his performance that even though he'd only been a United States Senator for 3.5 years, even though he was arguably the least qualified person in the last 100 years to assume the presidency, even with all of that, he was still ready to be president by how he held himself, how he communicated, his command of the information. The debate for him was the reassurance to the American people that they could trust him for the next 4 years. The debates did have a difference.
This is the last stop for you.
The new Conservative leader, David Cameron, was 40-something, like Barack Obama, and drew inspiration from his charismatic campaign for change.
There's no doubt in the American elections that one of the reasons they have caught people's imagination is because night after night, the contenders debate in live television debates. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the time for such live television debates at general election times has now come?
In America, they do not have question time every week where we can examine what the different policies of the different parties are.
It seemed likely that an incumbent Prime Minister's reluctance to give equal status to his challengers would once again torpedo a leader's election debate. But then came the surprise return to government of Peter Mandelson, who quickly became the Prime Minister's new best friend. Having previously advised Tony Blair against a debate when things were going well, Mandelson now hinted that with things going not so well, Gordon Brown might be changing his mind about TV debates.
Knowing him as I do, I have no doubt at all that he'd be up for that debate and he would approach it with relish. And the more he can take the fight to the Conservatives and show the contrast and differences between what we stand for and what they stand for, the better.
But Gordon Brown refused publicly to endorse Sky TV's unilateral proposal to hold debates and use an empty chair if Brown refused to take part.
We have suggested to you a very clear way of communicating is simply to debate with your opponents, and you can't seem to make up your mind on that.
Nothing about not making up my mind. There is a time for that.
What is your decision?
I'm sorry, Adam. There is a time for that, but it's not now.
When is the time for it?
There is a time for discussing these things. When there is an election about to come.
Well, we will try and get as many answers as we can on that. Thank you very much indeed, Gordon Brown. Thank you.
See you.
You're staying here. You're staying here.
No. Okay.
I really hope Gordon Brown or David Cameron don't try and wriggle out of this. It has to be an open three-way debate. The Liberal Democrats, 1 in 4 voters who voted at the last general election voted for the Liberal Democrats. 6 million people, more than any other Liberal party in Europe. So, of course, I want us to be there.
My message is make the decision. It's either a yes or a no. My answer is yes, let's have a television debate. Come on, Gordon, get off the fence, make a decision.
The Prime Minister, who was well behind in the opinion polls, eventually confirmed on camera his decision on election debates.
I'm so optimistic about the future of our country that I relish the opportunity to debate the big issues and to set out my vision about what we as a country can achieve together, and then let the people decide.
But behind closed doors, the hard graft was still to come. The politicians had agreed there would be 3 debates between 3 leaders on 3 channels. And at a secret location in Westminster, a negotiating committee from the political parties and the broadcasters met to try and agree the exact format of the debate programmes. And where did these negotiations take place?
Most of them took place in the Mothers Union building in Westminster, which is around the corner from the broadcasters' headquarters in Westminster. And they have a very nice set of conference rooms where we spent many hours discussing the minutiae of the prime ministerial debates.
At the Mothers Union, the 3 main parties' media chiefs, including David Cameron's spin doctor Andy Coulson, met regularly with a joint team from the broadcasters. They agreed each debate would last 90 minutes, and by the toss of a coin, ITV would host the first one. And they hammered out a 76-point programme format agreement. Questions would be put by a carefully selected audience who would not be allowed to boo or cheer or even to clap. And during the debates, the political parties would each have a live hotline to the broadcasters to appeal against what they saw as unfair camera shots or lack of balance. And unlike on the BBC's Question Time, there would be no specific personal questions to individual leaders, as there had been 5 years earlier when David Cameron debated with David Davis in the Tory leadership election.
But I'll take the question from you, sir. Yes.
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate David Cameron on such a superb speech at conference. But it's perfectly apparent to me at the moment that if you're taken out of your stage-managed comfort zone, you couldn't run a bath.
Oh, no. That's obviously one vote I'm going to struggle to win over the next few weeks, but I'll do my best.
Yes, sir, you're here in the front.
Some people think that because there are these 76 points and so on, that it will strangle the life out of the debate, that it's too formalised.
Well, I think you were never going to get a programme that was a free-form programme. I mean, this always had to have a structure to it that is unique. It's not like anything else any of us do. And clearly, from the broadcaster's point of view, what we wanted to make sure was that we had a programme that was interesting, watchable, and something that people would recognise as a real debate.
It's by no means certain that the decision to agree to a debate will turn out to have been the right one for Gordon Brown. It may all go horribly wrong, but I think he felt that he had nothing to lose.
Lights, camera, election. Television has already transformed our politics, and now comes the greatest change of all. The hope is that the live leaders' debates will provide a genuine insight into the character and policies of the would-be prime ministers. The fear is that the 3 will be stuffed with pre-digested sound bites and over-afraid of putting a foot wrong. But from this week, the 3 debate stages across Britain will become what George Bush Sr. called Tension City.
It's like a great spaghetti western, isn't it? The climax, the good, the bad and the ugly. This really is going to be the end of the line for at least one of these leaders. They are playing for their political lives. The stakes couldn't possibly be higher for them.
The good, the bad and the ugly, which one's which?
I think they all have elements of being good and bad, and ugly I shall leave up to others to decide. They're politicians.
And Jeremy Paxman interviews Nick Clegg in half an hour over on BBC One. Here on BBC Two, stay with us for a new series as we head inside the hidden houses of Wales next, followed by creamy risotto and stuffed tomatoes, letting you in on a few secrets with Raymond Blanc at 8:30.